Welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations, your authority in navigating the world of homeschooling diverse learners. Featuring Peggy Ployhar from SPED Homeschool, Annie Yorty from AnnieYorty.com, Leilani Melendez from Living with Eve, Stephanie Buckwalter from eLARP Learning, and Dawn Jackson from Dawn Jackson Educational Consulting and Tutoring. With over 75 years of combined homeschooling expertise, experiences, and perspectives, this group is eager to share their wealth of wisdom to empower your homeschooling journey. So grab your favorite mug, settle in, and get ready for insightful discussions, valuable insights, and practical tips. Give your homeschool the power boost it needs to successfully educate the unique learners in your home.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Today, we are going to talk about building strong voices, speech strategies for social skills, self-regulation, and learning success. And my guest today is Kristy Anderson. She is a speech-language pathologist with over 20 years of experience supporting children, adolescents, and the elderly. Kristy has worked with individuals from ages 2 to 21, as well as adults recovering from strokes and illnesses, helping them overcome communication and feeding, swallowing issues. She's passionate about making a difference in the lives of her clients, working closely with families to maximize their impact. Kristy also provides professional development for both parents and professionals, helping them to carry over therapy skills throughout their day. Her areas of expertise include articulation, language delays, AAC devices, fluency, social thinking, cognitive communication in the elderly, and more. And she also offers support for parents in IEP meetings and therapy collaborations, both online and in person. And she holds a master's degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln and has spent 21 years as a school-based SLP, 15 years in private therapy, and 10 years working with seniors in skilled nursing facilities. Outside of her professional work, Kristy is a mother of 2 adult children and loves spending time outdoors, whether it's gardening, paddleboarding, hiking, or even driving a tractor. Her faith plays a significant role in her life, guiding her commitment to compassion, integrity, and excellence in everything she does. Welcome to the show, Kristy. I'm super excited to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here and excited for our conversations.
Yeah. I think this is an area that a lot of parents have a lot of questions. And a lot of our community find themselves coming out of a public school situation and maybe have a different view of a speech therapist. And I'm hoping that for those of you that do, they're like, oh yeah, we tried that, done that. Listen in onto this conversation, because there's a reason that speech and language and all of that can still be helped, even if you've had a bad experience, because it may not have been what we're going to talk today. It may not have been your experience. And so I want you to just hang on through this conversation for that. And also, if you're watching live, we're live right now on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. So feel free to put your comments, your questions in the feed. Let us know where you're from. We'd love to be able to chat with you and to go on from there. And also, if you're listening to the podcast or watching the video later, just know that somewhere in the description, you will find a link also for the transcript for this broadcast. We know a lot of you sometimes have hearing impairment issues, or you want to take notes, and so we make that available for you as well. So look for that link in there, and that'll also take you to the link for the podcast as well. So well, without further ado, Kristy, I always ask this question to my guests when we first get started, but why are you passionate about this topic? Usually there's a story or something that is in your background that just ignited this passion that you have, and especially since you've been in this field for so long, to stay there. What is that?
I feel like I probably have like 4 different reasons. I'll try to summarize them together. I started out in college thinking I would keep my major as a communications major, and I worked at an after-school program, and there were two children there, one who stuttered fairly significantly, and another one who just did not say certain sounds correctly. And something in my soul told me that it would be a better life spent helping children communicate clearly. One of the children was made fun of and bullied. That would serve my soul better than to work for some corporation in marketing or whatever. And so I changed majors. And when my son was born and he started talking at 10 months, and he's still not stopped. He's 26 and he talks more than any person that I know. He was so extremely difficult to understand. And so I was going through undergrad and grad school part of the time when he was learning to talk. And I know that he would have required a considerable amount of therapy outside of home if I had not known what I had known. And to be able to incorporate that in our daily routines, from waking up until we went to bed. He went to kindergarten without any concerns in speech and language was his strongest standpoint. Still is. He can out-talk anyone, debate or not. But I've also had some families that I was connected with that had school-based services for their children and were not satisfied with the connection with school, the frequency of what was happening in school. They weren't seeing the progress that they thought they could. And at that point, I decided that I would start seeing some students privately to build that connection between home and school, and really found such an incredible connection when I could work with the families and build that bridge between what we were doing and what they saw at home to be able to help them, whether their children were in public school, if they were homeschooled, just to be that bridge for them.
Right.
So I just want everyone to be able to communicate clearly, and we'll talk more about what that means, because there are, I feel like, 100 different areas that as speech pathologists that we reach and touch, and it means so much to me.
Yeah. I think the top thing that most people think about is articulation, and I know that it's a big issue that kids deal with. I had one similar to yours. I couldn't understand a word he said. I mean, things that came out of his mouth, he was pretty certain that, this was how it was said, and he would say it, and like, his vocabulary grew because he was able to say it like with three different words before we finally got it. And I think that led to his talking a lot as well.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's awesome. That's a great story. And so many connections. Yeah. Our heart strings, they get connected a certain way. God works that way, in and out of our lives to pull us in the directions we need to go, and that he created for us to go. So I love that. I love that story. Yeah. So when I opened, I talked about how some parents may not have a full picture of what a speech language pathologist does, or maybe they've had an experience where it hasn't worked out that well. Can you tell us a little bit about explaining the role of an SLP, and just how, beyond, just what maybe a lot of people realize, and how you can support development and communication and learning and so many other things, and just give us a large view scope of how somebody with your expertise can really help families that we serve.
Sure. So I feel like it's going to take me a minute to unpack all of that. So like we mentioned, the articulation component. And when we say articulation, we're really talking about speech sounds. When children are making words and we know that a sound is incorrect, a lot of times there's S's and L's and R's. And sometimes it's much more involved and significant where we might have even vowels that are incorrect, that we don't even mark the beginning of sound words and ends of words. And really a majority of what's said is not understood. So it can be very mild and it can be very severe. And I would say then being able to figure out what is happening there, a speech pathologist can really go through, dive into the sound errors, find out the best method and strategy, whether they're targeting the therapy themselves, helping the parents at home know how to support. What cues do we use? What instruction? How do we teach our kids to start even like break the ice, to start to say some words that are a little bit more clear? So SLP, the second one would be language. Sometimes our kids say all of their sounds absolutely perfectly fine, but they struggle to answer questions, to ask questions, finding the right words to be descriptive enough. Just kind of the tip of the iceberg as far as language is concerned. Sometimes our vocabulary isn't big enough. We struggle to remember words. Sometimes our grammar in our sentence is difficult. Pronouns or verbs are incorrect. So that's another area that we work on. One area that I personally love working with is that social communication, social interaction. I love to call it social thinking. And how that interacts with other people and impacts friendships, interactions in grocery stores, with people at our church, in the community. And I would love to talk more about that one, but I'm going to keep going. Fluency, we have a lot of children who stutter, and there are normal times during development when children stutter and they grow out of it, and other times where we kind of get stuck. So when is it a cause for concern? That's when a speech pathologist can really kind of step in, provide some strategies for you. That's another one that we come across a lot, especially in our younger children. Voice disorders. Sometimes we have vocal nodules and things like that. We like to pair with doctors for those. Literacy development. I know Peggy, you and I kind of emailed a little bit about that and how literacy kind of relates to speech and language. And I always come from the standpoint that language is your foundation for learning. If we don't have strong language, we're going to struggle learning, and we're going to struggle learning with reading.
Absolutely.
Along with that phonological development, understanding sounds and being able to manipulate sounds for reading and decoding. And with our work with articulation and everything, those kind of go hand in hand in how that functions in our brain. So those, I think, would be kind of a broad overview of what speech pathologists do, especially with our, when our kids are in that school age setting. Above and beyond, we work with feeding and swallowing and stuff in a more medical setting. You kind of mentioned a little bit how we support, especially our families who are homeschooling, and that can look
absolutely.
So as a school-based speech pathologist, I have had families come to me in my school buildings, and we have that weekly session. Sometimes my parents will sit in the sessions with me, and sometimes they go run errands, and sometimes they have other children with them, and that's absolutely fine. So under that school-based, what do we want to call it? Guidelines for service, school-based and private therapy. We have different rules for qualification and when you can be seen by a speech pathologist and not. So school-based, I love when my parents get to come in and be a part of the session. I want them to see what I'm doing, how I'm modeling, how I'm teaching, because then you go home and then you're doing school and you can incorporate those things and make it a part of the day and make it natural. It can seem unnatural in the therapy setting, whether it's that school or clinic. But I kid you not, the same things that I do with my kids that I work with in the clinic or at school, exactly what I did when my kids were little in my home. And it works so well in the home, in your natural environment,
Right.
that everyday communication exchange. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, so a lot of parents don't realize they can ask to be involved like that. And then I've heard from other parents say that, especially in those school-based situations, not so much in private practice, but that some therapists they've worked with they don't know what to do with them because they don't have that interaction with parents, and it's mostly just a child being released from a class and then sent back to class. And so I've heard it from both sides. But if you do have a therapist and you are getting funding through your school district for speech and language, utilize that therapist. At least try to see if they're going to be friendly to you. Hopefully you get one like Kristy. So but yes, what that I think the list that you gave out is, I think, broader than I think most parents would think, because I just remember when my other son struggled with social skills. I wouldn't have even thought that he would need speech, or could benefit from that, or if a child had a reading issue, that could go back to that as well. So yeah, and maybe even the interchange, because I know, seeing that my one who did struggle with articulation later struggled with reading, and those connections that could be there, and the insight it would have been very helpful to have known about if I had been working with somebody to help point those things out, versus years and years of struggle of, why is this child not understanding, and I don't get this. So yeah, absolutely.
absolutely.
So
There's one thing that I was just thinking of.
mhm.
There was one huge component of what I do, that I did not include in here, and I currently have several students that homeschool that are in this boat, augmentative and
Hmm.
alternative communication. The communication devices.
Yes.
That's
Uh-huh.
another huge area, especially when we're looking at the raising rates of autism and nonverbal
Mhm.
learning disorders. Your speech pathologist will be your best friend. That is an
Mm.
area I probably fund at least 5 communication devices a year, and there is not
Hmm.
just one company. So that is one thing I want families to know. There's so many different types of devices, and you can trial as many devices as you want, with your speech pathologist. A lot of times, we are creatures of habit and comfort too. So a lot of times we get really
Right.
comfortable with a certain type of device or software on those, but they are numerous and varied. And what
Mm.
works for one student might not work for another student. So,
Right.
um, when we're talking about literacy and language, sometimes we have our children who are really struggling with articulation or language, and we need another mode in there to
Mm.
communicate those ideas. Um, so that was another one I was just thinking of as you were going through. I'm like, I did not mention the one area that I spend so much time on anymore,
Yeah.
is AAC, and then how that helps later with writing. And
Mm.
it's a good bridge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I when I was asked, I can't remember what panel this was on at a conference I was at, and the parents said, "Well, what's the first thing you need to do when you start homeschooling?" I'm like, well, on top of the parent-child relationship that needs to be, healed, because a lot of times that isn't, but
Yeah.
communication, because you cannot teach if you cannot communicate. And I think we rush right ahead to all of the teaching stuff, and we
Mhm.
forget the fundamentals, that communication is key. Your child has to understand what you're saying, and you have to understand what they're giving back to you. If that's not there, there's no learning happening.
No, you're
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Mhm.
it's the foundation of everything we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so important.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit more about social skills and just how that all can incorporate into improving areas where a child struggles that speech and language are involved?
Sure. Um, I struggled to know where to start on this one because, as we all know, if we have one student who's going to struggle in social language, they're going to look so different from the next child who struggles in
Right.
social language and
Yeah.
communication. So we it's always labeled as social language, social communication, social skills. I know that a lot of us, if
Yep. That's a lot. Yep.
we've heard those terms. Thinking of it as social thinking kind of
Hmm.
broadens the concept. When we have social interactions as neurotypical learners and people, meaning that we process the world fairly similarly to everybody else, we
Mhm.
understand that someone else is having a thought about us as we're talking. If I'm talking with you, Peggy, I know that you're listening. I know that you're thinking about what I'm saying. And if
Mhm.
you're formulating a question, I know that if my hair looks goofy, you're going to think, Kristy's hair looks a little goofy today. And if I do something socially inappropriate, that might give you a weird thought, right? So that's one thing that I love teaching our children, even my kids. If we're
Mhm.
interacting with someone, they're having a thought about us, and a lot of our kids don't understand that. Whether
Hmm.
we're on the spectrum, if there's for a variety of reasons, just starting to expand the idea in our mind that people are having a thought, whether they're thinking about us or they're not thinking about us. That's another one. Sometimes we
Right.
really get inside our head thinking that people are thinking about us all the time, and they're just really worried about themselves and what they are doing.
Mhm.
So the whole idea of social thinking, it's called that's called theory of mind, when we start to understand that people have thoughts, and when we are
Hmm.
interacting with them, we're making them have thoughts about us. So I love calling that to attention and start to really directly teach that when we're talking about social language. Um,
Right.
I think that's one component that's not really addressed quite enough. When we start talking about that, you can talk about interactions with siblings. When
Right.
you say
Mhm.
blah, blah, blah to Johnny, your brother, in this way, he is going to think and feel like you are, insert the blank, angry, mad,
Mhm.
frustrated. But if we say it like this, look at his face. He looks more relaxed. He looks more calm. So, really explicitly teaching the fact that other people are having a thought. How did your voice sound? What was their
Hmm.
reaction? What does their body look like? And really kind of practicing through what that looks like in your environment.
Right.
I take a lot of time. I know a lot of people do not like role playing, and I do not personally like role playing, especially as an adult in meetings. But
Mhm.
with social skills and practicing, I think it could be one of the best things that you can do. It can
Right.
be so much fun. I know
Mhm.
that sounds super corny, and I know it, but it is one of the favorite parts of my week when I get to teach social skills and start to talk about this social thinking and that someone's having a thought. And let's role play that. Say that in an angry
Hmm.
voice, and then have someone act angry and looking at that face. And when our eyebrows go down, that means that we're probably
Mhm.
upset. If our eyebrows go up, and really step by step teaching what that looks like.
Hmm.
Because a lot of times those cues are not read.
Right. Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, I do like how you approach that with social thinking because yeah, we did a lot of like social skills, and I mean, when my oldest was diagnosed, like the very first like social skills books started coming out. I mean, it was like brand new. Nobody
Yeah.
had even talked about that. And so, but we did some role playing, and it did make a huge difference for him to understand, yeah, that he wasn't the only one involved. And because his mind was so closed to only
Mhm.
himself, and to be able to
Yeah.
open up their world to what other people is going on with them, that it makes a huge difference that they're able to think outside themselves and be led on that journey, and it, they develop it over time, and but yeah, it's a teaching process that we have to be able to go through with them. So
Yes.
so when you I know I wanted to address this, the difference between working with an in school speech and language pathologist and a private practice SLP. Because a lot of families will have said, well, we tried that when our child was in school, and then we didn't see any results. Or, they may have just had a bad experience and they just don't see the benefit of it. Can you explain the differences between those two? Because it's huge. I know I've been talking about it for years at conferences, on our show, but it's always good to go through this again because it's been a while since we've talked about it. And
Absolutely.
what are the benefits of a family working with somebody in a private practice, and really how it can boost their homeschooling as well?
Mhm. So the first thing I will say is that I have met families who have been told by school-based and private clinicians that they don't do that, whether it's teaching an R sound or social skills,
Mhm.
and that really breaks my heart because my code of ethics that I adhere to professionally doesn't really allow me to say that. We
Mm.
all have our areas of expertise and specialty. In the school setting, we are we are required to work with child with a disability. And if it's an R sound, I'm required to figure that out. And if I don't have
Mm.
the resources, I need to figure those resources out to serve my student. So I know, and I've heard families tell me this, and it breaks my heart because I know that
Mm.
you're not getting the services that you deserve. Um,
Yeah.
so school-based versus private. I do provide both, so it's kind of
Mhm.
fun because I can play, I can pro and con both
Yeah,
sides
you can sit
of
on the
that,
line there.
which is great. So school-based, you had mentioned before that our funds they're funneled through the government, and so we do have
Mhm.
guidelines that we have to follow in a school-based setting where it has to apply to our academics. If we cannot
Yeah.
show that there's no impact on the academic performance, then we don't qualify.
Yeah.
And we are very much depending on your state that you're in, your guidelines for qualifying articulation or language might look different from another state as well. So
Right.
in some states, students cannot receive services for R sounds until they're 8 or 9 years old. But
Yeah.
research also
Mhm.
tells us that by 8 or 9 years old, we need at least double the amount of practice now to correct that sound error. Um,
Yeah.
so the benefit then of school-based, because I'll throw this out, is while we sometimes are a little bit more restricted in what we're able to work on, is that it is free. And that if
Right.
you are in the school setting, that can flow throughout your day. And hopefully you
Mm.
have a speech pathologist that's willing to provide you information about what's happening and what they're teaching and how to carry that over at home.
Yeah.
I know that caseloads are also absolutely ridiculous across our nation. And I know a lot
Mm.
of speech pathologists are struggling to find the time to make that happen.
Right.
So then we're going to transfer over to our private setting. And this can be, your clinics Sometimes these are in hospitals, sometimes they're private clinics. And then you have some people who do speech privately through their home.
Mhm.
Here, we still very much look at what is age appropriate. However, our funds aren't necessarily determined by what the education setting says. So we can work on sounds a little bit sooner than what they're able to in the school setting.
Right.
In clinics, sometimes you can be a part of small groups, which is also nice for some peer modeling
Oh.
or
Mhm.
interaction. And then I know that it is nice for parents to build some relationships with other parents who have students.
Mhm.
Sometimes just that shared burden of what have you been doing at home? What works? And just knowing that someone else is
Right.
going through what you're
Mhm.
going through is, it's nice to go through life with people that are
Yep.
understanding where you are.
Mhm.
What I find incredibly beneficial private practice is when the clinician and the parents are able to connect about what's going on in therapy.
Hmm.
Either they're able to be part of the session or communication afterwards, like, this worked really, really well today. We did this strategy. I would love to see you carry that over at home and potentially have
Yeah.
some practice at home. When I have my private speech clients, currently, I always have the parents with me, and then they're seeing what I'm modeling and having them teach. And sometimes I have them do that, and I watch them, whether it's
Mhm.
language or modeling on our assistive communication devices, and then the
Oh, yeah.
articulation component, because it really does feel awkward sometimes when you are doing that. And I know I've it's not always fun having someone watch you do your job. However, it is great when a parent can see what you're doing and then take that and do it at home, kind of
Right.
fumble through it a little
Yeah.
bit. Sometimes the first time
Mhm.
it doesn't feel natural. Sometimes when your speech pathologist tells you to use wait time and to count to 10, 10 can seem like
Yeah.
10 hours and not 10 seconds. But to
Right.
feel it and to see it and to know that some of those strategies really work. Um,
Mhm.
and then personally, what I like to do is sending off a quick email afterwards about what worked really well and some recommendations for the week.
Oh, yeah.
I
Mhm.
think that one is huge. You know, we've talked a lot about how our families are so important. And what I
Mhm.
want to see, no matter what setting I'm working in, is for my families to be able to carry over what I'm doing into their home, where it's comfortable, where communication happens, and everyone hopefully has some guards down and it can
Mm.
just become a part of what we do. I
Yeah.
think in clinics, in school settings, a lot of times our guards are up. We want to look like we have it all together, and I don't care if that's the child or the parent. But at
Right.
home, our guards can come down, and we can practice, and we can mess up, and we can do those things together.
Mm. Mhm.
And, I think it builds a beautiful relationship too between the parent and the child when they're working on it together.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it's that also that consistency,
Yes.
because you're not only applying it once a week usually, but you're applying it multiple times a day. And yes, and then you can apply it across more subjects as well. I know that was a hard thing for a couple of my kids, was translating one thing that they were doing to another subject or topic or even situation. And the more you can expose them to those things outside an office or a classroom, then the more they realize, oh, these are things that I can use on a regular basis, and they kind of integrate better as well. And so it's really a win-win all around.
You
So
nailed it. I cannot tell you how many times I will work with children and they'll see my face and all of a sudden they say all of their sounds correctly, or they use
wow.
all the language strategies and I don't even have to teach them or remind them. They know that I have the expectation and they know how to do it, but then they leave
Mhm.
my setting And then they relax and they go back into the
Yeah.
communication strategies that they were using before. So
Hmm.
to have that expectation and to integrate it across their day and really build that in, that's where a lot of times simply private settings or in-school services start to struggle when we don't have that connection across settings, is that it can take so long to generalize those skills when we already have them. I would
Yeah.
agree. That was a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Oh, yeah. I just know in talking to parents in the past who have opted for a private setting, that's one thing that they said that too for them has what made huge successes for their kids
Mhm.
because they've seen the benefit. And I know I even have one person who had been on my staff for a while, and she's like, I use my speech pathologist for everything. She's like, we write goals together, we write our homeschool IEPs together. She's like, I utilize my therapist to the extent that I can because, and she even was trained as a special education teacher, but she saw the value in working with people who could see her kids and their struggles from different perspectives, to really become part of her team to help educate her child the best way that she could learn. And sometimes, it's a struggle. There's just so many unknowns, and the more people that you can have speaking wisdom into your schooling and your teaching, it's just going to keep you from going, yeah, beating your head against the wall, going, I don't know why this isn't working.
It's so true. We all have a different lens that we come, we
Mhm.
come and look at the world through and look at students through. And as parents, we want so much for our children. And then you overlay parent and educator, and then to
Mhm.
have that outside view and to have some other people with a different lens and experiences, and they've seen however many students, and they can bring so many other experiences and circumstances to yours to broaden it. It makes a huge difference when you have a team like that can work together.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's so beneficial. And yeah, I want to point out too, if you're going homeschool IEP, what is that? Go to spedhomeschool.com. We have a free download on our website that you can write your own homeschool IEP. We'll walk you step by step through that. So you can learn more about that there. So one of the other things in our title is self-regulation. I know probably some parents were just tuned in for that. So I want to make sure we don't miss that because that's a huge thing. I know as I was talking just this last week, I had a meeting with the people from Rainbow Resource, which homeschoolers know they're like the mega resource place to go to. And they're like, give us the biggest thing that kids are dealing with. And I'm like, so many kids are dysregulated. Their brains are so scrambled. They don't even, executive functioning. That's something like high on the list of what parents are trying to get help with. So how can somebody with your expertise help a parent whose child really has trouble with self-regulation?
This one is a really big question, and it ranges with age. So, your self
Hmm.
regulation for 5-year-olds versus your
Right.
teenagers. And what does that look like? It looks 100 different ways.
Hmm.
One thing I would say is self regulation. Um, Struggling with that is communication. When we're struggling
Mm.
to self regulate, our bodies are communicating something to us, and we're trying to
Yeah.
communicate something, whether we know it or not.
Mm.
If you look simply at someone who is going to bounce their leg over and over repeatedly, really fast, that typically communicates something, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's a physical, whether it's emotional.
Mm.
I'm nervous. I there's something not regulated in me, but it's communicating to us. So being
Yeah.
able to look at what is not regulated in our children and starting to put a word to that, a sentence to that, talking with your child about what is not regulated, I see, and then name it, and then find out the function of that self-regulation. And the more communication you can put with it, then you can start putting different strategies in place to bring some regulation to it. So expressing emotional needs, that's one that we look at. A lot of times self-regulation, frustrations are one that's huge for sadness, excitement. We're going to put those three in there because I think they're three really big hitters, and they're high on that emotional scale a lot of times.
Right.
And they can create big behaviors is the thing that
Absolutely.
I think can be most concerning about that. And sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes those behaviors are very difficult to deal with, and sometimes they can be dangerous,
Right.
especially as our children get older. I know that as a professional, I have been hit, kicked, slapped, bit, all of the things. I've had things thrown at me. And why? Because we're not regulated, and we need a way to communicate that. Sometimes I have found the more language verbally I put at someone who is not regulated, the more dysregulated they become. So finding ways to speak less and sometimes having visual communication is huge. I know that we a lot of times think that visual cues and communication kind of looks like a step backwards. However, when I'm not regulated as an adult, I do not want people talking too much at me. I will tell you that. It will send me through even faster. And I feel like I have a pretty good toolbox for handling all of that. So if I can tell someone, yes, I'm mad, give me a minute, like, let me calm down. Our children who are dysregulated might not have the ability to say that calmly, but if you can point to something like, are you angry right now? Do you need a minute? Then honor it, and just giving them that time. I think that's one that's really hard. And even being sad. Sadness is another one. And what I can value as sad versus what a child can value as sad can be very different. I might be sad when a friend moves away, but a child might be sad when they didn't get to eat what they wanted for breakfast. That can also relate into frustration, and that's going to spill over to what you're doing when you're going to start learning. So kind of giving that, honoring it, putting some communication to it, and then finding steps beyond that. We're not always going to give our children exactly what they want so that they're regulated. It doesn't really work that way. But having conversations later about when that would be appropriate or what we're going to do instead. We're not always going to tell them no forever, but having that conversation when they're regulated, let them calm down, and then you can have a conversation. And again, I know that looks very differently from a student who's verbal to one who's maybe not as verbal and really struggles with self-regulation.
I think something that we posted for years on our social media and talked about on our blogs too is behavior is communication. It may not be the way you wanted it communicated, but somebody's trying to say something. And if your child doesn't have those communication skills, it often comes out in behavior. And so I love, you talking about, being able to simplify that, being able to put those things into words for them, or for them to be able to communicate some way. I know when my kids were younger, I realized that they weren't able to say, this conversation or this disagreement with my sibling has gone too far. Now we need to, separate for a while and think about this. So I basically said, okay, if it gets like this, in those times when they weren't all worked up, you got to do this, put your hand up and say, stop rule. And so they knew that was the point where things were getting out of hand and they wanted out. And that was their out. And and it worked really well. That's when I started to become alert and go, okay, there's something brewing here. If the other child doesn't walk away, that's when I can say, okay, now you two sit on other sides of the room. Um, and we will de-escalate and take care of this. Um, but giving those strategies, and a lot of times as parents, we're in the midst of it and the chaos is just so much, but to have somebody come in and say, well, here's a simple way for you to be able and them to be able to communicate with the situation that you have going on. And I know, because you can get so frustrated and so tired, and just worked, it just works you down, and you feel like, oh, I just can't do this anymore.
I think it's a really easy way for parents to get dysregulated themselves. I mean,
Yes,
to be
absolutely.
honest, it can wear on you, especially when it
Mhm.
happens constantly throughout the day. Um,
Yeah.
as a parent, there was a moment um, when I was having a quiet time, and it was talking about disciplining our children. And it really occurred to me, um, and this discipline regulation go hand in hand, but it really doesn't. It was what touched my heart. Is what mattered to me in this is that the whole purpose of teaching our children, whether we are teaching them something constructive or they have done something that we think is probably not in their best interest, and so we're disciplining them, whether it's a
Mhm.
conversation, a timeout, or whatever, is that my desire for you as a child is to grow up and be a successful, independent adult. What does that look like?
Mhm.
Successful is 100 different definitions, and that's not even important. But it's my heart
Yeah.
of love for you that I want to teach you this. And so
Hmm.
it really helped me with that personal self-regulation and not feeling so frustrated and so angry, because you
Right.
get so tired as a parent, and
Mhm.
it's so easy to kind of fall in that cycle when things are not going well. And when it's really not going well,
Mhm. Yeah.
it's really hard. But to be able to kind of find yourself in your soul and go, I can stay
Yeah.
calm because I know that my long-term goal is this for my child, and I'm coming from a place of
Mhm.
love for them, and I want their best. I want their
Yeah.
absolute best here. And so,
Mhm.
I think even still as a speech pathologist, I look at that with the children that I work with, is that I want their best, and I see
Yeah.
what that long-term road can look like, whether it's just an R sound, or I have students that are on the autism spectrum that are nonverbal. My goal
Mm.
is for you to have a very full life, and
Yeah.
um, staying calm in that moment, providing you those
Mhm.
strategies. Like, you look mad. How can I help you? And
Mm.
just staying
Mhm.
calm and having those visuals for them. And it might not be a visual for every student. Let me be clear about that.
Right. Yeah.
I liked your stop rule because it's fast
Yeah.
and it's easy. That is fast and
Yeah.
easy. It's very clear.
Mhm. Right.
Really just
Yeah.
knowing our heart for why we're teaching our kids and how we're interacting with
Mhm.
them, and that calmness inside that we can have um, when the world is upside down in our home.
Right. Yes. And I think that causes us to step back when we start thinking of these strategies about what our bigger goal is. Because a lot of times we're just
Mhm.
going through the day and we're like, I just got to
Yes.
get through this day. And having that bigger plan allows you, again, not to get so sucked in to all that can suck you in and drag you down.
Yes.
But on top of it, it can allow you to see beyond just the daily struggles into the bigger things that are happening in your home. And we often lose sight of that because it gets so chaotic sometimes. And, looking back at my 19 years of homeschooling, it wasn't, it, it was the little things, but they added up to big things. And
Yeah.
and I had to be purposeful about what my big things were to make those little things, first of all, not be so impactful, on myself and how I was teaching, but also on the direction we were going and not giving up on that as well. It all really adds together, and I think it's a good reminder that all happens. So so yeah, do you have a couple stories to share with us of or one, I know we've got about 10 minutes left, of just differences you've seen in working with a family and a difference in, whatever, I guess, God lays on your heart as far as like a child or it was we're focusing on learning success too. And I know there's probably so much impact that you've made on so many families over the years.
You had that in the email, and I could not tell you, hundreds of faces went through my mind in different families. And hopefully I'll share a couple. There's one that I'll share first. And there's one child that I worked with, and when you find a therapist, find someone who's willing to teach your child to blow their nose, tie their shoes, and say their speech sounds correctly, because they all go hand in hand. But this was this child that I worked with. There definitely was just a whole plethora of things that we worked on over the years. We started out with some L's and some R sounds, but we also had some disfluency. So we were stuttering too. And that part did not go, it wasn't one of those typical times where we have some disfluencies. It was persistent. So we addressed the articulation. We learned how to tie shoes in the speech room. And we targeted fluency strategies. And if anyone out there has a child who stutters, that can be really a very big struggle for the child and for the parent. So we learned, strategies to get us out of being stuck. We learned strategies how to prevent being stuck in our speech. And I serve, like I said, a variety of ages that you read off. And so when I got him in high school again, I was like, what are you doing? How is life going? And because I had worked with him all through elementary, and then we had a little break from each other in middle school, and he was amazing. And he still had an IEP, but he was on the debate team, and he was on the speech team. And he still received some supports for reading and math, but he had learned how to accommodate his disfluencies to be able to be on the debate team. And he will still message me on Facebook or make posts. And I think that's one of my favorite, because while a lot of people who stutter will always, have that and have to monitor that their entire life, he never let it stop him. And I think that was one of my favorites, because whereas articulation, we can fix sounds a lot of times and just be done, and we don't think about it a whole lot. The fluency one tends to be ongoing for a lot of our children. Let's see. I would share my very first child that I had come into my home for private speech. They were ones who had school-based speech therapy, and they were not happy. They did not feel like she was meeting with him as often as she was supposed to. He was not making progress, but had excellent grades with everything else. So I said, sure, let's do this. And we worked for about 2.5 years, and he is currently graduated, getting his doctorate. He's going to be a family doctor. And our R sounds. That makes me feel old. We read stories that he loved. We picked books that he liked. We played games and really worked on those R sounds and had feedback. And we would record him when we were working and then play it back for his mom and his dad so they could hear him when he was at his best, and then provided strategies for at home. They had sticky notes by their refrigerator to remind him, like he made them and stuck them there. So during breakfast, he would remember to use his good R sounds. And then one of the times he chose to practice was when he was online playing games with his friends. And I was like, well, don't you want them to like understand what you're saying when you're online playing video games? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, put a sticky note on your screen. And he did. So really finding those fun ways to incorporate that generalization, like you were talking about before, like through our whole day. Not all families love video games. Some families love video games. It doesn't matter so much if you do or you don't. But if you're incorporating those strategies and it's flowing over into your life, that's the part that makes me happy.
Yeah. And it's where he was going to see a change in how people reacted to him too, or related to him based on their understanding of him. So it incorporated it into his own interest too, which is so big.
Motivation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. Well, can you talk a little bit about your website and your practice and how our families can connect with you?
Sure. So my website is Beyond Speech TX, and I know, Peggy, you're out of Texas, but TX does not stand for Texas.
Texas. Well, we think everything's about Texas.
That's okay. TX actually stands for therapy in the medical setting, and Beyond Speech Therapy seemed really long to put on for a website. So BeyondSpeechTX.com is my website, and I am still working on really adding more resources on there. But you can reach me at Beyond Speech TX@gmail if you want to reach out to me. And I know that's on the website as well. So that would be one way to reach out. And I seriously would encourage anyone that has questions about any therapy you're currently receiving. If you have questions about anything, just reach out. I do not know everything at all. But, I do have a lot of experience, and I know someone who knows something. So that's one thing I like about what we do, is that we create networks, and there's always an answer out there somewhere. So if you really are struggling or have questions or aren't satisfied, I promise you there's someone out there that can help you. So never let that stop you. I know that, it sounds like, Peggy, you've been through a lot with your kids, and it's just a constant searching and finding what works for you and your family.
It really is. Yeah. And I always like to reassure parents, people who are trained in special education, who are therapists, they still try things. I mean, they don't know the instant perfect answer every time either. So we just do the best we can. And sometimes we miss the boat, but God didn't, he knew we were going to miss the boat. And I have to give myself a lot of grace, because I didn't know a whole lot when I homeschooled my kids. And now, I learned stuff, like just talking to you, Kristy, today. I learned something new. And I can't beat myself up about it that I didn't learn it when I probably could have applied it better. But it's going to help, other parents out there that need it right now. And I'm still asking the questions and still learning. And that's what it's all about. And my kids will catch up with the things that they need help with when they do. So yeah, I'll put the link for your website in the show notes, and so parents can connect directly with you and your resources. So yeah, that's awesome. And if I'm not sure where all you found the show, but if you go to our website at spedhomeschool.com/calendar, it will tell you all of our upcoming events, broadcasts we have, training, everything on there. And so definitely check out that link on our website. And next week, we have a pre-recording actually that was done this past week called, and it's the title of the show is Being Brave, Lessons Learned from a Guide Dog. And my co-host Stephanie Buckwalter sat down with Michael Hinkson. He's a New York Times bestselling author of Thunderdog, and Michael actually lived an incredible true story of how his book talks about how he and his guide dog, Rosalie, escaped Tower 1 on 9/11 and the bravery and that he learned and just how to trust his guide dog. So they're going to have a conversation on the show next week about that. So definitely tune in with your kids for that show to learn just some things and wisdom that he has to share on that. But those links will also be on that page on our website. So tune in for that. But thanks again, Kristy. This was an amazing conversation. I'm glad it worked out. I know we had to reschedule, and so I had told my podcast guest just wait another week. We're coming, so I'm glad it worked out to reschedule and to have you back on the show and just for all that you had to share. Thank you so much for the work that you do and the families that you bless.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again here next time on Empowering Homeschool Conversations. Until then, God bless and take care. Bye, everybody.
This has been Empowering Homeschool Conversations, provided by SPED Homeschool, a nonprofit that empowers families to home educate diverse learners. To learn more, visit spedhomeschool.com